welcome everyone to our podcast this afternoon. We'd like to welcome you to a pretty exciting afternoon. We have Dr. Jennifer Jill Schwirzer with us, and today we're going to be talking about a pretty important topic, and that is marriage, relationships, and not only our relationships with other human beings, but indirectly our relationships with God. Today's book is entitled Try This at Home: How to Heal, Help, and Hone Your Marriage. This book was written by Jennifer Jill Schwirzer, Dr. Schwirzer, and Pastor David Asscherick. At the end of our podcast today, we'll give you information on how to get this book. You can order it online and also order it from 3 different venues. Dr. Jill, tell us about this book.
Okay, well, this is a book that Pastor Asscherick and I conceived of writing some years back because we saw a really great need in the world for support for families. We felt that the family unit, the nuclear family, what you might call the nuclear family or the Edenic family, is a miraculous and wonderful and beautiful design of God, and that it was under attack both from the outside and from within. It used to be our culture in the West really supported the nuclear family, but that's come into question, and there's not so much support. And there's this idea that any kind of social unit works as well as the original design of father, mother, and children. Well, that's all been sort of challenged. And so there's this challenge from the outside, but there's also challenge from the inside, where families are really struggling. Married couples are really struggling to know how to manage their conflicts, how to build intimacy into their marriage, and how to have really a viable, healthy, flourishing family life. And we just wanted to provide some support for that.
So there are lots of books on marriage out there. What makes
this one different?
What makes this one different?
There's a few things that make it different. One is that we have, with the publishers, Types and Symbols, developed a really cool feature where you can open the front flap of the book, and there's what's called a 30-day love journey plan, where you can take this book. It's broken up into 30 sections, and you can go through the whole book one section at a time with your partner and use it kind of like a devotional tool. And I would like to say that I think any couple that does that and then utilizes some of the practical tools we have in the book and really road tests what they read in the book will experience transformation in their marriage. It will improve.
So when you say any couple, what does that mean?
What do you mean?
Any couple meaning...
Anybody who reads the book.
Yeah, anyone who reads the book. It could be a person of faith or a person not
I think it could be a person who maybe isn't convinced on the Bible and God and all of that, but utilizes these principles, which I feel are originate in the heart of God and in His Word, but they work whether you believe that or not. And so, yes, I think there's a lot. The other thing that makes the book unique is that it has a whole section. There's 2 things. One is that it's grounded theologically. So the first section is the section Pastor Asscherick had the most to do with, and it's called Laying a Biblical Foundation. So he grounds what we teach in the book in Scripture, and he does a beautiful job of it. And that really does add a lot to the book. But then the second section is called Building Practical Love Skills. So I would say that's another thing that distinguishes the book, is that there's a lot of practical stuff in the book. There are worksheets. It's not just ideas. I'm not just saying, here's how you should think about this, but I'm saying, try this. Because the book is called Try This at Home, and the whole idea is an experiential journey into the heart of God, I would say, but also into the heart of your marriage and into building it. So we believe in trying. We believe in trying different tools. We give a number of different practical tools in the book. And if people will road test them, they'll find the one that works for them.
Can this book be used for those that are for premarital counseling?
This isn't really aimed at people that aren't married yet. This is aimed at married couples. But the good news is that we're going to be doing a whole series under the Try This at Home brand. And we probably should have started with the singles book or the dating book, but we started with the marriage book. But we're going to backtrack a little bit in the sort of chronology of building a family. And we're going to go into what do you do when you're single and you want to find a life partner. And so that one is going to be called Try This at Home Dating. And the good news is I've already written most of the book, and Pastor Asscherick is working on his part. And so we should have that book within a few months, hopefully, or maybe a year. And that's going to be number 1 in this series. This will be number 2. And then we're going to go on to parenting. And we might do a book on sexuality, and we might do a book on aging and dying. David really has a burden for that. I told him I'd be aged and dead by the time we wrote that. But, it might go fast enough to where I'll still be alive.
Yeah, no question. The book on sexuality should become a bestseller, I'm sure. Tell me about your chapter on Out of the Courtroom. What is all of that about?
Yeah, so that's one of the most important concepts or sort of paradigm shifts we encourage people to experience as they're working on their marriage. What we find is that very much of the difficulty in marriages comes from bad approaches to conflict. You're inevitably going to have conflict if you're trying to live intimately with another human being, the two becoming one. It's like you're locked in a closet together, and sooner or later it's going to be like you're breathing too loud, or your foot is in the way and my leg fell asleep, or there's going to be a conflict just because of the proximity of marriage and the intimacy of it. And how many things you share. You share everything from toilets to bank accounts to children. And so there's so many areas or arenas in which you can experience conflict. And so how you approach that conflict makes all the difference. And one of the things we like to say is that process matters more than content. And what we find is that if people will approach conflict in a way, in a certain way, it will, in a really good way, it will actually build the relationship. And if people approach it in the wrong way, it can tear down the relationship. So the first step that people have to take is to sort of commit to getting out of what we call the courtroom into what we call the workroom. In the courtroom, your sole purpose, your end goal is to find someone to blame. Whose fault is it?
Right.
And that's the natural default mode of the human mind, is like finding someone to blame.
Exactly.
But the workroom says, how can we improve our relationship in the midst of this conflict? So one of the things we do is we like to use this analogy. Joe and Linda have a conflict because they have their garbage can is overflowing. And what has happened is that Joe asked Linda to put his fishing rod, his old broken down fishing rod, in the garbage and to tape over the fish hook, which was still on the fishing rod. She gets aggravated with Joe, and she doesn't tape over the fish hook, and then the garbage man comes, and he impales his thumb on the fish hook. And so Joe comes home that night, and the garbage man has left the garbage in a fit of anger because he impaled his thumb. And what Joe and Linda do is what so many couples do. They stand on opposite sides of the garbage, which is in between them, and they start to find
Blame shift
out who's to blame. And
Yeah.
Joe blames Linda because she didn't tape over the fish hook when he told her to. And Linda blames Joe because Joe is being bossy and should have taped over his own fish hook. And they just go back and forth, and the whole thing can escalate. They can say unthinkable things to each other in the heat of battle. They can drop the divorce bomb. They could just go all kinds of not good places in that escalated conflict mode. Or what they can do, and so if you imagine the couple like opposite sides of the garbage can fighting with each other, what they can potentially do, especially if they try some of the techniques that we offer in the book and work on them, because it's a learning curve. It takes a little while to shift your way of approaching things, but they can shift out of that courtroom mode into a workroom mode where they, instead of fighting with each other over the garbage, join hands and look at the garbage together and say, how can we move this garbage? And once they get into that workroom mode, they can negotiate. Like Joe will say, look, I should have taped over the fish hook. Sorry, but I didn't. And now what are we going to do? And Linda can say, okay, I'll call the garbage company and I'll apologize to the guy and I'll see if he'll come back tomorrow. And Joe will say, okay, and I'll go tape over the fish hook right now so it doesn't happen together. And I'll try to be more considerate moving forward. They can just kind of negotiate through and solve the problem. So that's going to work. That's going to be effective to getting that garbage pile out of their driveway. But here's the thing is that typically the garbage pile is emotions or dynamics in the relationship or extended family drama or something involving the unseen things of life. It's nonetheless very real. Emotions are extremely real, even though we don't see them, we can't measure or weigh them, but they are very real in that they start a lot of our conflicts and wars and murders and rapes and killings and, the things we see on earth here. So that's the difference between a courtroom mode and a workroom mode. And that little shift, like if people can develop a conscience about how they approach conflict within their marriage, and if they can individually ask themselves, am I in courtroom mode or am I in workroom mode? That can because then they as a couple can transition to that workroom mode and start to develop habits, of approaching conflict effectively. So that's essentially what courtroom to workroom looks like.
I recall someone saying years ago that the greatest human need is the need to be right. Can you comment on that? And how do we shift from that need to be right to where both
you're willing
can be,
to suspend that?
Yeah. How do you do that?
This is why I think the theological grounding of what we do is so important, because that's a miracle of God. For me to, as a human being, lose my self-righteousness, my entitlement, my blame dynamics, my impulse to blame really takes the grace of God. But I would say on a spiritual level, it involves the individual, instead of resting in their own righteousness, learning to rest in the righteousness of Christ. And if that's my default mode, like I don't have to be right about everything. It's okay if I'm wrong sometimes, because that's not the ground of my justification. The ground of my justification, my righteousness, my good standing with God, my merit as a human being is that it's a gift from God, not something I generate within myself. That's going to put that person in a place of, I would say, spiritual peace and even emotional peace. That's going to result in them approaching their human relationships in a way where they don't have to fight for every inch of sort of righteous territory, if I can say it that way. And it's going to mellow you out to where you approach your marriage with a lot more generosity and,
Needing to be right is kind of our human default mode, isn't it?
It is so much.
Yeah.
So much.
And when you see what is going on in the world today, not only relationally, it really boils down to that.
There's a lot of fighting in the media. Now that we have 24/7 news cycles, people's nervous systems are ratcheted up, and they're constantly like fighting for righteousness turf, if I can say it that way.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think that basic shift in a marriage is going to be very profound. Now, let me issue a little caveat here. There are some marriages that need a courtroom. And that's another thing that makes this book unique, is that we actually have a couple of chapters on
I read those. Those were pretty good. Why don't you elucidate on those?
Yeah. So on the very end of the practical section, we have a third section called Help for Deeply Troubled Marriages, because a lot of marriage seminars and books really work hard on getting couples to compromise with each other and getting couples to open up to each other. And that's typically, in a reasonably healthy couple's lives, a good thing. But if there's abuse in that relationship, it's the opposite of what you want to do. And so there sometimes needs to be more of a courtroom approach, and people need to come into, a marriage situation where there is abuse and be kind of a referee, whether it be pastors or counselors or sometimes law enforcement officials, if it's that bad, and needs to say, you are harming your spouse and that's wrong and you need to repent. So there's a place for that. We don't want to completely deny that sometimes marriages get into a condition where they need a courtroom, but we want to give people tools for separating out, what is a courtroom issue and what is a workroom issue. And the vast majority of issues in marriage, in most couples, happen to be workroom issues. It does happen that they need a courtroom, but we don't, want to turn everything into a courtroom.
In your experience, what have you seen courtroom versus workroom? I mean, just percentage-wise.
Yeah, that's a good question.
I mean, because we have so many marriages that are under strain, and divorce is rampant. Christians, non-Christians aren't even getting married.
Yeah.
What have you seen in your counseling?
Well, let me tell you what I've seen in my counseling and what also is in the science. I think I believe it's a large percentage of married couples experience physical escalation, but it's typically what is called reactive violence, where both people are getting physical with each other. So a good proportion of the physical escalation in marriage is both people, and it's not really abuse unless it's only one person perpetrating on the other. Mm-hmm. Then there's a small percentage of that physical violence in marriage that's what I call perpetrator patterned abuse. Or John Gottman, the marriage expert, calls it characterologic violence or characterologic abuse, where the character of that individual is so corrupted that they're actually turning on the very person closest to them and abusing them. And so there's a very small
percentage. And that's pathological.
And that's not only pathological, it's illegal if it gets physical.
Okay, good point.
So it's very problematic, but it turns out that it's if you crunch the numbers, it's a very tiny percentage of marriages where that actually happens. But I'll tell you something, if you've got one of those marriages, you better be just and right in your dealing with it, or you're going to put that, for instance, wife, if she's being physically abused by her husband, in a position where she is trying to bond with the very individual. She's trying to build trust and bond with the very individual that's violating her on a regular basis. So we take that very seriously, and we give people tools to know, are you in an abusive marriage or not? Because some abuse doesn't leave physical scars. Sometimes it's emotional abuse.
Yep.
And so I would say anecdotally, I've worked with hundreds of couples over the last 20 years of my counseling career, and I would say anecdotally, it is a very small percentage. Now, realize that when someone comes to counseling, it's going to be troubled couples, so it's going to be a little higher percentage than the general population. But I would say, under 5% are really legitimate abuse cases, maybe under 10%, 5 to 10%, somewhere in there. So it's small, but it's significant, and it needs to be dealt with properly. And I've been on that journey with a couple of different couples where I had to finally throw my hands up in the air and say, I've tried to help you as a couple, but you're the problem. You're abusing your partner. And I'll tell you something, when it's emotional abuse, it's usually, it's not always the man. It can be the wife perpetrating. Typically, it's not physical abuse, although that does happen. But I've never encountered that. And I've never encountered physical abuse in any of the couples I've worked with. But I have encountered emotional abuse, and it's not always the man.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you write about 6 little foxes in your book.
Yeah.
What are the little foxes? Are these the ones that eat the grapes, or?
Yes. It's based on the passage in Song of Solomon. And Song of Solomon is a love book. And it's talking about a marriage, essentially. And the writer says, I think it's the groom, he says, catch us, the little foxes that ruin the vineyards, our vineyards that are in bloom. And so we go into those foxes, and what we've done is we've assigned 6 different relational patterns or habits that really break down the health of a marriage. That can happen from either person. It can be in either or both people. But typically what happens is they're cyclical. So one person's little fox kind of feeds off the other person's little fox. So the little foxes that I have identified based on the research that I've done are, number 1, too much criticism. Secondly, and I'll just give you the overview here, escalation, losing your temper, throwing things, punching walls, God forbid, hitting each other. Invalidation, which is a subtle one, but it's very real. defensiveness, not being willing to hear any negative feedback, taking everything personally and fighting back. Withdrawal, or what we call stonewalling, where you shut down and you won't handle conflict with your spouse. And then the third one is misinterpretation, where everything goes through a filter. Your spouse says something and you pass it through this filter and you misinterpret them, and then they feel very frustrated. So these are the things that are the heavyweight issues that come into relationships that I think really work well with some of the listening techniques and some of the bonding techniques that we assign in the book. We try to help people identify in themselves their own little foxes. We try to get them to take responsibility,
ownership.
See if there be any way of pain in me and lead me. Because typically you're like, you do that all the time. But we try to get them to take account for their own little foxes and identify what their weak spots are and then work to correct them. So what we do is we identify the little fox, but then we give a replacement behavior. Because if I just tell you not to think about a pink elephant, you're going to think about a pink elephant. But if I say, don't think about a pink elephant, think about a green giraffe, then you have something to put your hooks in and move you out of that behavior into something else.
Which is the biggest little fox?
I would say, percentage-wise, it's going to be criticism. Now, let me talk about what I mean by that. And John Gottman, who I draw a lot from him, really appreciate his work. He was able to guess with, my understanding is 85% accuracy, whether a couple would be married in 5 years or not based on body language and facial expression.
I remember that.
He was so good. He is so good. He has really good counsel, really appreciate his work. And he really goes deep into criticism in marriage. And what he says, and I've heard this recently, is really it's not a great idea to issue criticism at all. It's better to phrase your areas of unhappiness in me language and in need language. So me, instead of saying, you are such a slob, you throw your clothes on the floor, I would say instead, I start to feel a little bit like a maid when you throw your clothes on the floor. And for my sake, and so that I don't feel like a maid, could you not throw your clothes on the floor? So that's not me judging you or criticizing you. That's me expressing a need. And that's safe to do in the context of a marriage where there is basic...
Because it's not accusatory.
That's right.
It's just stating fact, but in a way that impacts the individual, not attacking the other party.
And you're not attacking their character. You're not saying this is wrong with you. So what Gottman says is, put your negative feedback in need language. And that really is a very good safeguard. But another good safeguard is, even if you put it in the best language, give negative feedback very seldom. Because the ratio of affirmation to criticism should be, now there's quite a bit of research on this, ideally, it should be like 20 to 1, 20 affirmations to 1 criticism or negative feedback, even if it's put in need language. But what we do in the workshop is we say, just shoot for 5 to 1. Now, Gottman says 5 to 1 in a conflict situation, 20 to 1 in the run-of-the-mill day-to-day. Okay, but 5 to 1 is so much to ask of most couples that we say, let's just start here. Your affirmation to criticism ratio should be 5 to 1. You should say 5 positive things about your spouse for every 1 negative thing you say. And work on that first. Start establishing that habit.
What do you see that doing, that type of affirmation? What does that do in the other party? For
some reason, negative feedback takes a big draw on the emotional bank account of a couple relationship.
Shame? Does it?
I think so. I think so. Yeah. It just, it's just never pleasant to be criticized by anyone in any circumstance.
Right.
So it takes a draw on the emotional bank account, and you want to replace that value in the bank account. And it takes about 5 affirmations to replace 1 criticism to keep the emotional bank account healthy, is what we find. I'm not sure the reason for that, but what we find is that when people learn how to affirm one another, and it's challenging because at first you're breaking a lifelong habit sometimes of just giving negative feedback. Like
Sure.
a lot of people are raised in homes that you just don't affirm anyone ever for anything. You only say anything to another person if it's negative feedback. That's just how they live.
Well, they're speaking truth, right?
That's
truth in
right.
quotes.
That's their normal. But there are a
Right.
lot of positive things that are
Sure.
true as well.
Yeah, we forget those,
And so you think you're speaking truth, but really you're speaking negative truth and partial truth.
which can break the person,
That's right. And so you're drawing on that
breaks
emotional,
their spirit.
and you break their spirit, and you just do harm to that strong sense of generosity and goodwill that should exist between a couple. And you do that over and over and over, you're going to start having all kinds of other problems. All of the little foxes are going to come in. So one of the first things we do is encourage couples, try the 5-to-1 affirmation. At first, it's going to feel a little contrived because you're not used to it. And it's going to feel to the other person like, what are you setting me up for? You look really nice in that dress. Oh, what does he want out of me now?
Exactly, exactly, right.
So it's going to feel weird. But once you establish it as part, like my husband and I have been through that journey. I come from a very critical home, and I got words, and I could just slice him to pieces with my words, and he could just stonewall me and make me miserable.
Laser accuracy.
Exactly, and it'd be terrible. So we have learned that we have to affirm one another, and initially it felt a little contrived, but now it's just part of our couple culture, and he'll affirm me, and I know what he's doing. He's doing his duty of keeping the affirmation ratio high. But initially it's going to feel like, what does he want to get out of me? Is it sex? Is it money? What's going on here? Or it's going to feel fake.
And it becomes natural.
It does become natural.
And it heals.
It's amazing.
It heals the marriage.
So many couples I've worked with, they'll do a little better, and they'll start on sea legs, totter along and be walking, in a healthy direction. And then all of a sudden they'll come to counseling one week and they'll have completely relapsed. And the first question I'll ask is, how is your affirmation to criticism ratio? And without exception, there's never been a time when they've said, we're doing terrible and we're affirming each other a lot. Never. It's always, oh, forget it. We're just, constantly picking on each other. It never ends.
Yeah.
So.
Again, going back to the need to be right.
Mm-hmm.
So you criticize the other person to try and elevate yourself in the relationship.
Now, interestingly, women tend, and Gottman affirms this, women tend to be a little more critical. Men, on the other hand, are more prone to defensiveness and withdrawal. Now, this is the dogma. I'm not saying it's true of every couple. So don't tell me your couple is different as if that's news to me. It's not. I get that. But it tends to be that women are a little more critical, and they come from a good place. They're a little more critical because they're a little more relationally wired, set up to be very attentive to the health of the relationships in the home, not just the couple relationship, but the children and the happiness of the home overall. We're gifted in that way. So because of that gifting, it can become a liability if we don't know how to manage it correctly, and we can end up being too hard on our spouse, but coming from a good place of wanting a happy marriage. Then what typically happens is the man or the person being criticized, whichever the case may be, becomes defensive.
Right.
And that criticism then, instead of that person thinking, okay, they're not happy and going away, they typically raise the volume on the criticism. Then the person gets more defensive because they feel more assaulted, and it just escalates from there.
So is there such a thing as constructive criticism?
There is, but I agree with Gottman that try to put it in neat language. But yes, there are times, you're going to have to, one of the things we need to realize, if we tend to be defensive, which is pretty much all of us, but some people more so, is that it's unrealistic to be in that close of a relationship and never get any criticism or negative feedback from your partner.
Sure.
So get over and dismiss or deal with foundational beliefs that set you up for defensiveness, like I should never be criticized for anything, or any criticism of something I've done is an assault on my character globally. they're saying I'm bad. So when, any kind of self-responsibility immediately becomes a shame experience, then that's going to make that person intolerant of any negative feedback. And they need to change that within themselves. And they need to realize it's unrealistic. I'm going to get some negative feedback from my spouse.
That's the way life is.
They're going to be unhappy with me sometimes. It's going to happen. Yeah.
Dr. Schwirzer, I really appreciate you being here today. And this information that you've shared in this book, Try This at Home, How to Heal, Help, and Hone Your Marriage, can be obtained from multiple resources, right? From Types and Symbols online.
TypesandSymbols.com.
.com?
I think so.
.com or .org?
I think it's .com.
.com. And
so.
then
Let me look it up.
your website at Abide, yes?
Abide Network has a shop, and yes, we have the books
and
on
we'll have the links posted
in
down below.
And by the way, that's a really good resource. Abide Network has marriage coaches that have been trained in the Try This at Home methods. And if you need any kind of mental health coaching or courses, we are there for you at abide.network. That's all you have to put in the search bar is abide.network. And any questions you have about Try This at Home is under the umbrella of Abide Network. We would be glad to help you with that.
Now, can this book be done in a program online, or do you have in person? What do you have available? I've seen some online things and some in person.
We do. We have workshops, usually 4 or 5 times a year in various locations. And we kind of like it that way. We don't do them online as much, although when we do a workshop, we will meet with the people that were at the in-person workshop for a couple of weeks afterward, or a couple of sessions afterward. But we like to keep it with the physical presentation. So we do a number of different events each year. You can fly in and anybody can come to any of them. We want to do a cruise. We want to do some kind of tour, maybe like the David Asscherick tours. But we have events basically, and you can access the stuff that way. But we also have an online version if people want to watch videos, and then we have the book.
Awesome.
Yeah.
What kind of feedback are you getting from people who have read the book and attended the seminars?
Very good. People are really happy with it. And a lot of them have this response. They're like, finally, someone's talking about
key issues.
This. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm shocked because I'm like, there's a lot of marriage seminars and workshops
marriage
out there.
weekends. Yeah.
But for some reason, they feel like our content is getting to the a root of things that maybe other programs aren't, or maybe they just haven't had one of those marriage workshops. I don't know, but people feel they respond as if we're the first people trying this. And I'll be honest, there are a number of different workshops and books out there that are excellent. And I think if you're really serious about your marriage, you'll get trained. I mean, if you're going to be a surgeon or a doctor or a chiropractor or a counselor, you have to go through years of training so that you don't mess people up.
Right.
But we don't do anything for marriage, which is the hardest thing we've ever attempted. So get exposure to a lot of different books, a lot of different workshops, and take the best of all of them and what works for you. And I hope that ours will be part of that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
In closing,
it's typesandSymbols.com.
.com? Mm-hmm. Okay, awesome. And again, we'll have it below in the description for you to look at. And definitely, we've sponsored some folk to come to some of the events, and they've been very, very positive feedback-wise. We've enjoyed the book. We hand this book out to our friends. Look, in a world of craziness, we know there's an adversary out there trying to destroy one of the things he created in the Garden of Eden for our benefit, and that is relationship and marriage. Yeah. Jennifer, why don't you close with prayer?
Okay, I would love to. Father in heaven, thank you so much for the gift of marriage. Thank you for the gift of family. Thank you that somehow the synergy created in a marriage is greater than the sum of the parts. And a beautiful thing comes forth, even if we're really broken people, which is true so far in 100% of the cases I've known. The people that come to marriage are broken, sometimes broken in very deep and profound ways. And then the marriages get broken. But in spite of all that, you are able to rule and overrule and give us your Holy Spirit and set us on a path of healing. And I pray that you would do that for each couple and each person listening, and that if our resources can be part of that, all the better. I praise you, Jesus, for what you've given us in marriage and the family, and I ask you to bless ours. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you for listening.